So today I want to further explore my conversation on generational differences in sports. Um, if you take soccer, football, basketball, and baseball, you can show that each of those sports signify one of the four major generations, like millennials, and each generation dominates those particular sports. So millennials are basketball, and Generation X dominated baseball. And the heyday for football was the baby boomers, like in the mid 80s with Joe Montana. And soccer, that's way back in history. I don't even know when soccer was. They don't even know when soccer was even actually formed, really. But you could. Okay, so you have Generation G or Generation Great, and they are the crude and personal evaluators. What that means is they're good at mechanical things, and they can see what works and what doesn't work. And that's why they're able to fly to the moon in a tin can. That's how you have people like Tesla, H.G. Wells, all those guys. Everything that was mechanically innovative happened with that generation, basically. Then the baby boomers came along and we stopped going to the moon. You see what I mean? They already had all the technology and they just built on top of it. All the innovation part is already done. You might say that there's other forms of innovation, and that's true too. But the innovation that goes on now is more of a generalization of what's already known. It's not like the discovery of what's possible and tinkering. So soccer fits them because they don't use their hands, as opposed to baseball uses their hands. Also, the millennials are connected to the boomers. I call them millennicrats and boomocrats because football and basketball, they have more penalties. You can see, except the millennicrats are more personal and nuanced, and the boomocrats are more impersonal and crude. Like, boomers are like the archetypical, or the archetype for the boomer is sort of like the archetype for the modern politician. They don't even talk in slogans, they think in slogans. Like education, if you ever watch House of Cards, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. And then the millennials are different in the sense that they're more on a personal scale. They're attacking the rules of society more so than the rules of government. And Generation Xers are the artists. They're the nuanced personal evaluators. And they go with Generation G. You can see baseball uses its hands. It's a little more nuanced. But the thing about soccer and baseball is they're spatial. There's less penalties. It's less bureaucratic. And the millennials, I could notice a difference between me and my brother when we were younger. Once the Nintendo, growing up in the 80s, and once the controls got less intuitive and there's more rules that you had to remember, like pushing this button and this button while you do this and this effect will happen. Like, I don't want to do all that. But the millennials seem to be really good at it. The video games have gotten more nuanced. So I call the archetypical millennial like a millennicrat, and I think of them as Cylons. like in Battlestar Galactica, whereas Boomocrats are more like droids in Star Wars. Let's see what else. And so, sorry, the sun's in my face. There's gonna be a generational war. It's already occurring. So I see history as a rotating wheel of personalities, and this is the first rotation, and so everything sucks because we're trying to complete the vision of H.G. Wells and Buckminster Fuller and Tesla and Roosevelt and Eisenhower and Henry Ford. All these people were more interested in advancing humanity and making it work for everyone, whereas that all kind of ended with the boomers. It all became everyone's out for themselves, like Steve Jobs. There's already been like 3 movies about Steve Jobs, and he's kind of an asshole. I mean, he screwed all his employees. He outsourced all the jobs. People making iPhones with suicide nets. It's really horrific that people actually look up to him, and he's not even that creative. Like, all of his ideas, like someone in Generation X would have came up with. I remember when the iPod came out, I was like, why? I know there was patents on it and stuff like on preventing people from doing an MP3 player probably earlier, but like, seriously, it's not like an innovation. Everyone came up with that, had that idea in their head. As soon as MP3s, you could burn them to CDs, they're like, why don't they just make an MP3 player? I mean, the computers can play the MP3s. What else? So when you compare generations, you gotta compare like the politicians and the CEOs from each generation. You get a sense of how they're different. Like Steve Jobs versus Henry Ford, or Hillary Clinton versus any of the Roosevelts. First of all, the people in that generation, you kind of, even the politicians, you almost felt like you believed what they were saying just by listening to how they talked. It's kind of off the cuff. Whereas when Obama talks or Hillary Clinton talks, it's sort of like you can tell that it's like a robot talking. In House of Cards, they sort of also kind of allude to this difference between the generations too. Like the head house speaker guy is at odds with Kevin Spacey's character, and it's a generational conflict. It's because Kevin Spacey's always scheming, and whereas he's not having that. He's like, no, he's like the last remnant of like that older generation, like Bernie Sanders, which actually sort of cared about stuff. I mean, there's a bad side to that generation too. I'm not saying that that's not true. They're very eugenics oriented because they're impersonal. You saw like in the 40s, like after Hitler, people don't understand that eugenics was actually in the mainstream. And then it just went underground after Hitler. It never really went away. It did go away because the boomers are not as much like that. But racism is still there. It's like all the stuff that the boomers didn't really affect anything. You see Kaepernick. That was really important. He's reaching all the mouth breathers, the people that have no idea what's going on, the people that watch football, and it's crazy. Like, I was talking to my dad, and like he kind of gets it, but like I don't think he fully understands the extent of how bad it is to be a black guy. It's not simply more black people being arrested. for lesser crimes. They're getting, like, you see white people just, especially if they're rich, they're just getting off with slaps on the wrist. It's like, it's not, it's like the whole system is systematically corrupt. It's not that one little piece is corrupt, or it's a matter of education or anything like that. Well, first, you can understand sort of the racism too from the cops. They're just in the shit, and they're not the brightest people in the world. If you've ever talked to a cop or tried to reason with a cop, you understand what I'm talking about. But they're in the shit every day, and they just see black people doing this, black people doing that. And so they built up this image of a black person. Even if the causes of that behavior from black people and black communities is a result of racism to begin with, that put them in this poverty situation, it's still okay. The other thing about that I don't think my dad understands is that there's a lot of false convictions. Like, the case with the hurricane, because they made a song out of it. But I remember, like, a couple years ago, like, it was like every other month there was a black person that got released from prison on DNA evidence that refuted the evidence of, like, a rape or a murder, and they spent the 25 years in prison for just being black, basically. And so for Kaepernick to do that, it's bigger than seeing a couple black people get killed. It's like, it's just never stopped. Racism is never stopped. I mean, not racism's even like too weak of a word. It's like, when you ruin someone's life, like, say Denzel Washington's character in The Hurricane, his life was ruined. You have to think about that. And it's not just one black person. And what do I know about this stuff? I empathize with this stuff because I empathize with everyone, but I've also been in school districts, and just knowing that being different, if you're different and you vary from any of the rules or anything like that as a substitute teacher, especially in elementary school, there's something about, I never have problems with dudes, but there's something about menopausal women, for example, whereas they just hate me. Like, if I don't follow the rules exactly, then they're just like, rawr. And that mentality reminds me of the cops' mentality. If you try to challenge anything they do or do anything different, you're just ostracized in this society. Just like Kaepernick is being ostracized and being called nigger and things like that. That's the whole reason why he has to do what he has to do, is because it is the people that are lashing out at him that are actually the problem. So that's a little side topic, but I think that there's going to be a generational war. It's already starting. It's just you need a little more of Generation Z. And remember, I said Generation Z is Generation Regi. It's the reincarnation of Generation G, and Generation G extends all the way back. It's the first generation. It's the long generation. It doesn't mean that there's more. It's necessarily more of them. It's just that you have to understand that the population was a lot smaller, and it's been exploding. So even though it's extended way back to the beginning of us writing things down, it's still not that much bigger than, say, the millennials. And Generation X is obviously the short generation. So the long generation and the short generation go together, and the boomers and the millennials are pretty similar in their size. Not size. Like, you associate boomers with everything supersized, like big houses, SUVs, big screen TVs. Then you associate the millennials, they're like mini boomers. You associate them with the phones, and they're staring at them. And you associate Generation G with hats and jazz and good taste in cars. Like they have a better aesthetic sense of cars than boomers do, or millennials. Um, Generation X are the artistic innovators and the personal innovators. You see all that music that came from the 90s, especially. There's nothing like that. You think the baby boomers did something with music, but all their songs are really crude. They're not really saying very much. Like, you listen to John Lennon, and he's saying imagine, peace, whatever, but that's all he did. He didn't try to do anything. He was just collecting his paycheck. And I'm not sure if he even cared that much. He was more of like just trying to look cool than like trying to actually do anything. Same with Bob Dylan. It feels like everyone from the baby boomer generation is just a big facade. That's why Bernie Sanders seems so crazy to people, because people don't remember that there used to be authentic people. Anyway, that's all I want to talk about for now.